It's the ultimate sleeper car, and the Swedish box that saved Volvo. It's the 850. Volvo has been using a rear-wheel drive platform, such as the Amazon and the 240, to great success. However, by the time the 70s came along, they didn't have much money, and its main rivals from Germany were doing way better than them. And although the 700 series was a success, they needed to keep making cars in order to keep the success rolling in, and they didn't have much change. But they went ahead with a new project anyway. It was called Project Galaxy. Why? Because they were reaching for the stars, that's why. They decided to go with a brand new front-wheel drive platform to make their new cars. One problem though, all of their engines and gearboxes couldn't run front-wheel drive because they were too big. Oh, so they also decided in the same project to make a brand new engine and gearbox system called the Volvo Modular Engine. The Modular Engine series would be so good, Volvo would use it until 2016. That's pretty darn successful. And combine the engine and gearbox with the new drivetrain and floor plan, they were going to make 2 models in conjunction using the same basic series. A small economy car called the 400 series, and the larger compact estate car. So it was a compact sedan, but still bigger than the 400 series. It was called the 850. The Swedish are fantastic at naming things. Now, the Project Galaxy that Volvo is using to develop all these cars was costing a lot of money. And if you recall, Volvo did not have a lot of money. So, in order to continue financing what will become the largest industrial project in Swedish history, they had to ask the government for money, which meant that Volvo had tons of debt. And if the Volvo 850 and 400 was not a success, Volvo would probably go bankrupt due to debt and unable to repay said debt. So this was really do or die moment for Volvo. After 4 years of development with Project Galaxy, it finally spawned the 850 series in 1991 for Europe and 1992 for America. It featured a 2-liter or 2.5-liter 5-cylinder engines, because the 5-cylinder engine transversely mounted could actually fit in the front-wheel drive chassis and drivetrain. It also featured, well, it's a Volvo, so crazy good safety features like self-adjusting seatbelt reels and the revolutionary side impact protection system, also known as SIPS. Delicious. Basically, it was structural components added in the doors that in the event of a T-bone collision, it would distribute the energy across the entire car instead of just the doors, meaning you wouldn't die if you got into a T-bone. But that wasn't even the craziest thing that they added. You see, they added this thing called Delta Link semi-independent rear suspension. The Delta Link rear axle basically used compressible rear bushings to give the 850 in effect passive 4-wheel steering. That's like Honda Prelude, Porsche type stuff. And then combine that 4-wheel steering system with the small 34-foot turning radius, you had a nimble little sedan. But honestly, people, we're not here for the sedan, because just a year later, in 1993, they gave us the best Volvo ever, okay? The 850 Estate. It featured 99 cubic feet of storage capacity in the back while still maintaining the boxy, compact dimensions of its rivals. And you know what? It could store more than its rivals. So, suck on that, Mercedes and Audi. It was also the first Volvo ever to be offered with all-wheel drive. But it only had 170 horsepower and only 200 were made. So, they're pretty rare. But it was a stepping stone for what Volvo would eventually become. But we don't want to talk about all-wheel drive. Okay, that's cool and all. But what we really want is more speed. As I said, the max horsepower is somewhere in the 190 range. And that's good for the 90s, but it's practical and efficient. So, Volvo left that practical sense behind and threw a big old turbo on there. That's right. They introduced a 2.5-liter, 10-valve, 5-cylinder engine with a turbo bolted on, making 222 horsepower. That meant 0 to 60 in 7.1 seconds for a front-wheel drive car in the 90s. That's pretty darn fantastic. That's BMW territory right there. It sold very, very well. Combine the turbo sales with the success just in general from the 850 meant that Volvo sold over 1.2 million 850s in its 9-year production run. Good job, Volvo. Your gamble paid off. Now, the turbo was all well and good, but what if you wanted something a bit faster, a bit more aggressive, a bit more sleeperish? That's when you get the T5R. It was launched in 1995, and it was basically a tuned-up turbo version, which meant a bigger turbo, with more boost, which also meant more turbo lag, but it also meant 243 horsepower and 250 foot-pounds of torque. And thanks to a subtle body kit, which gave let's be honest, brick, a drag coefficient of just 0.29. That's good by sedan standards, that's good by MX-5 standards, and this is a boxy estate. That meant T5R had a top speed of 153 miles an hour in 1995. It also had Pirelli P0 racing tires, ultra low profile, ultra aggressive, with the aggressive suspension to match, which meant it could pull 0.88 Gs of cornering force. Again, that's not great, but you have to consider the time period. This is 1994, and this is an estate. And the T5R also introduced an onboard diagnostic system, which was a first in the automotive industry, and it was so good that it led to a industry-wide requirement to install it on the cars. Because it's Volvo. If Volvo isn't innovating something for safety or reliability, I don't know what they're doing. And the T5R, as you would expect, it sold quite well. In fact, it sold so well, Volvo, which had no plans on making a successor to it, decided to make a successor to it. And they would spare no expenses, okay? And you know what? The only expenses they spared was the badging, because they threw out that T and the 5 and they called it the 850R. It's one of the best cars ever made. Don't shout at me on that, that's just a fact, okay? It had a power of 250 horsepower, it had bucket seats, a functional body kit, a 5-speed manual transmission, a limited slip differential, a reworked ECU, a reworked fuel pressure system, brand new turbo manifold, bigger intercooler, beefed up clutch, and best of all, a spoiler on an estate car. We have a spoiler on a wagon. That is awesome! It could do 0 to 60 in under 7 seconds for a front-wheel drive estate car, and it had a top speed of 155 miles an hour. It's fantastic. I would kill to get one of these things. I love it. It's one of my favorite cars ever. Now, believe it or not, despite the 850R and the T5R, these are not actually the fastest Volvos. No, 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 no. You see, Volvo had won the European Touring Car Championship in the 80s with the 240, and then they left. And they thought, in order to drum up some publicity, they thought running the 850 in the British Touring Car Championship would help get people to notice their new car so they could, buy it. But there was a problem. The BTCC required that all vehicles running had to use their standard factory engine, naturally aspirated though. You couldn't have a turbocharger or supercharger. And that was a problem, because if they ran without the turbocharger, they would have less than 200 horsepower, while their rivals were putting out somewhere in the 290 range. Well, Volvo enlisted the icons of Le Mans, Tom Walkinshaw Racing, to improve on the 850, and they actually decided on running a wagon. Yes, you heard that right, they were going to make a station wagon go racing, because there was nothing in the rules that said you could do that. But there was also nothing in the rules saying you couldn't. And they had another sneaky advantage. They used a loophole in the British Touring Car Championship rulebook that allowed the aerodynamics of the wagon to be more efficient than that of the sedan. I don't fully understand how that works, but whatever. Now, they had the stripped out weight. They had the aerodynamic advantage, but they were still about 30-40 horsepower down on their competitors with their engine. And the rules mandated that the valve angle had to be ran the same on the race car as the production car. Well, they couldn't get a steep enough valve angle to get any power out of it. So, TWR came up with a very clever idea. There was nothing in the rules that said you couldn't cut or remove sections of the engine. Just the valve angle and the block had to stay the same. So, they cut the valve head at an angle, so that when they bolted it on, it was at an angle instead of perpendicular, which meant that little tiny modification made 300 horsepower. Right up there with their competitors, and that meant they could go racing. Now, what's funny is, all these loopholes they were using got them scrutinized every single race, and they passed every single race because it was in the rulebooks. Much to the annoyance of their competitors, which is a bit hypocritical, Alfa Romeo, but whatever. Now, they knew that this was their first year competing in the British Touring Car Championship. They also knew they were running a massive estate car. They also knew they weren't expected to finish good. And that was correct. Their highest finishing position the entire season was 5th, which means they got around 8th in the championship, a little less than that. But the fact it was vaguely competitive at all meant that there was more news coverage about the racing estate than the winner of the championship. Which meant Volvo's marketing PR move paid off in dividends. And the 850 estate remains one of the most iconic and beloved British touring cars ever in the history of the sport, despite only being ran one season. The loophole, the aerodynamic loophole that made the estate more efficient than the wagon, or than the sedan, that was closed, and they ended up switching to a sedan body for 1995 and 1996, where they scored a respectable 3rd place overall in the championship. But in 1997, the 850 was finally replaced with the S70. Now, officially, Volvo made over 1,800 changes between the two models, but it's basically just an updated, refreshed 850. And the 850 platform, the P80, was finally replaced by the S80 model in the year 2000, and the remnants of Project Galaxy, except for the engine, was tucked away into retirement. The 850 was Volvo's biggest gamble. If it didn't succeed, we might not have Volvo at all. but it also led to some of the greatest things in the history of not just sports, but in the auto industry, revolutionizing tons of safety features and standard equipment, while also being a fun-to-drive, practical, fuel-efficient, safe, reliable family car that could just so happen to beat base model BMWs in a drag race. That's absurd. And if you look at today's lineup, not just of Volvo, but of, in general, the auto industry, there are very few vehicles that can say they are practical, economical, cheap, safe, and fun to drive. They were truly ahead of their time, and the 850 is one of the most iconic and best looking vehicles in their history.